I'm going to self-introduce, and my name is Naftali Hoff. It's a pleasure to be with you. I actually got to know Michael a few weeks ago, maybe closer to a couple of months at this point. We sat on a panel together at the OJBA conference or expo in New Jersey. I was the moderator. He was the expert, the panelist, amongst a few others. And we got to talking a little bit, and he invited me very kindly to share a few words with you this evening. It's somewhat of a noisy backdrop, and in order to kind of just go with the flow, especially the fact that you've been working all day, and I want to be mindful of where everybody is. So we're going to be doing some talking as well as some, let's call it at-table conversation. So I'm going to be presenting some content. I'm going to also be asking you to think about some ideas and talk to each other in the context of that. And it's going to all be leadership related. Okay, so that's the basic gist of it. I'm an executive coach. I'm actually a former educator turned executive coach. And so I work with leaders and help people understand what leadership is all about. And since I understand that you are all leaders of people, certainly you're all leaders of selves, right? That's a starting point that everybody can connect with. But we're also leaders of others, and we're going to talk about why that's important, a little bit about how leadership and management are different one from the other, and specifically how you could become a more impactful leader in your work. That's the mandate that I think I have in our conversation. Now, before I do anything else, are you familiar with the old philosophical question that has been bouncing around, since the beginning of time, that if a tree falls out in a forest and nobody's there to hear it, did it make a sound? Can you just raise your hand if you've heard that question before? Okay, again, the question is, if the tree falls in a forest and nobody's there to hear it, did it actually make a sound? So I have a 21st century version of the question. I hope you'll indulge me for just a moment. The question goes like this. If I go and I speak at the Bordeaux Steakhouse on behalf of Jack Jaffa and Associates, and I don't take a selfie that I was actually there, right? Was I, in fact, really there? No. Do you understand the question? I mean, this is very profound. I hope you're with me on this. So I'm just going to ask you to, if you want to just adjust your collars or your neckties or whatever's comfortable for you. See if we could just do this quickly here. Okay, excellent. Let's get the ladies in as well. Best angle I can here on this. Okay, one last one, and we go. All right, done. What's that?
Do you mind if I steal that line from you?
No, I don't mind at all.
When I go to clients,
No, it's a lot of money, but we can talk about it. Okay, everything, as you've learned, everything is negotiable. Okay, so here we are. Now, so I want to thank Michael for inviting me. I want to thank Gabrielle for inviting me as well and making sure that everything happens to get to this point. A lot of conversation, but it's really a pleasure to be here. And honestly, if I may say so, it's very interesting. I was just speaking to somebody who knows an executive in a sizable telecom company out in New Jersey about getting to know the person a little bit better, maybe be interested in coaching. That's just what I do, constant conversation about my work. And for a variety of reasons, some of them financial, some of them otherwise, there's just no budget. And they just don't prioritize it. And there are companies and cultures that operate that way. Not a judgment, not a criticism, but a reality. And so the fact that you are here enjoying each other's company over good food, and on top of it, that efforts and costs were expended to bring in some training, some conversation, some ideas about leadership is not something to be taken for granted. So I think the leadership team here deserves a lot of credit. And I'll share with you there's a story. I don't know if you know the name Tom Watson. Was he a golfer? There was a Watson who golfed, I think. But the one from IBM. So the famous CEO of IBM in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s, he was the one who really built the company and certainly made it what it had become until, of course, Apple showed up and caused all sorts of problems. But the story goes that he had an executive, a relatively young guy, who made some really poor decisions, investment-related decisions, and cost the company millions of dollars. Watson calls him into the office. The guy's, as they say in Yiddish, he's on spilkes, which means he's all nervous. And he's worried about what's going to be with me. I'm going to be fired. This is it. And he sits down and he says, I suppose you invited me into your office to let me go. And Watson says, no, young man. I just wanted to let you know that we very happily invested a few $1 million in educating you. and he kept him on and understood. It's interesting, I wasn't going to mention this, but there's a cute little story that goes as follows, that an investment banker, very successful over many years, is interviewed by a reporter towards the end of his career. And he says, "Sir, you've been super successful. What is the secret of your success?" And he says, "It's really easy, 2 words, good decisions." Sounds simple enough, right? So he says, "Well, that's great. Well, how do you come to make good decisions? We'd all like to make good decisions." And he says, 1 word, experience. And he says, "That's also fine and good. But how does a person achieve experience?" And the answer is 2 words, bad decisions. So bad decisions lead to experience, which ultimately lead to good decisions. So if we're in an environment that recognizes and appreciates, and this, by the way, as leaders, this is good reminders for ourselves as well. It doesn't mean we can tolerate everything and anything, but it does mean that if we allow our people space, and they do make mistakes along the way, so long as it's in good faith, and ultimately that they can be coached and trained to be in a better place, they will oftentimes learn more from those errors and be more resolved as a result of those errors than had they never made the mistakes in the first place. And there's so many people out there that only achieve greatness because they had a major setback once upon a time. Whether it was career-related, personal-related, some combination thereof, something that didn't go right. And in the moment they were petrified and they were angry and all justifiable emotions around that failure. But then they picked themselves up by the bootstraps and they learned, and maybe they had mentors or coaches or people in their corner who guided and helped them. Maybe they went back to school. Maybe they did different things to get themselves out of it, but they took action. And all of us have to be reminded that that's really what life is about. It's making mistakes, learning from them, failing fast, and springing forward in a positive way. So we're going to kind of dive into a little bit more, but I wanted to mention one last kind of cute conversation that circulates around the web. I don't know if it ever happened, but it probably did. Right? The CFO goes to the CEO and he says, "Sir, all these PD programs, all this professional development and training programs, they're all wonderful, but what if we invest in our people and then they leave us?" I was actually just listening in the car to an audiobook, and the median, this is obviously not reflective of present audience, but the median amount of time that people typically stay in one job, about 4.5 years. Millennials, about 3 years. So we need to understand that as we deal with workers who are younger and younger, the idea of people leaving is just part of the culture of and what it is. Anyway, so he says, what happens if we invest in our people and then they go? Right? It's money down the drain. And so the CEO responds and he says, well, what if we don't invest in them and they stay? Right? Dun-dun-dun. So here we are, okay? So we're investing and we are ultimately making sure, hopefully, that this is going to be very meaningful. And the reason that I think leadership is so important is because we have to remember that leadership can and should exist at every level of a company. So we have the idea, you might be familiar with leading up, right? Talking to people who are your superior technically, helping them see things and whatnot. So the story goes that President Nixon, in the 1970s, his tenure as president was concurrent with the tenure of Golda Meir, who was the prime minister at the time of Israel. And Golda Meir was listening to Nixon and how he was complaining about the difficulty of running a country of the time, 250 million Americans. And so she says to Mr. President, I feel your pain. But you should know, I'd rather be a president of 250 million Americans than 5 million prime ministers. Because Israelis, as we know, tend to be very opinionated, right? And so the reality is we have leadership in our ranks. The question is, how do we make sure that they are doing the right thing, and how do we support them in their various efforts? Okay? And I think the answer to that question lies in a single letter. And the letter is I. The letter I. Which I think is very interesting because oftentimes we think of it as purely, let's say, selfish. Me, capital I. Only word in the English language that's consistently capitalized that isn't a proper noun. And yet, at the same time, I also talks about really being authentic with oneself. Who am I really as an individual? Who am I as a leader? And the 3 different words that I'd like to unpack with you that all start with the same letter. They're actually in reverse order in terms of the alphabetical, but only slightly. And the words are integrity, influence, and impact. Integrity, influence, and impact. And I think we can unpack what all 3 of them are and why they are important and how I see them all kind of coming together. In fact, in my mind, they really flow in that sequence. A leader who is a person of integrity, we'll see what that means, can then become a person of greater influence, which according to John Maxwell, you might be familiar with the name, someone who's considered a leading voice in leadership and whatnot, says that leadership is all about influence, nothing more, nothing less. That's really what it is. Management, for example, to briefly contrast the terms, because oftentimes we think of the two of them as synonymous. Management is I don't have the exact quote. Walter Bennis and some others talk about the difference between the two. In effect, management is doing the work right, whereas leadership is doing the right work. In other words, management is about making sure things get done, but leadership is determining what needs to get done and what's the strategy around with which we're going to make that happen. So we've got integrity, and we have influence. And then when you have both of those, you could really be a leader of impact, because that's when the rubber hits the road, and that's when it all kind of comes together. So I actually wanted to give to you, since I told you we're going to be doing some work around the table, not really much yet. Let's see here, how is this organized? Let's do this one first. Okay. And I'm going to ask if you don't mind to distribute this way. I'll keep one for myself and pass these around as well. Let's just look at the top of that first page for a moment, and you will see the chevron that kind of links the three of them together. Would anyone be willing to read number 1 for us? Integrity. Go right ahead, please. That's what I call leadership right there. Okay, go for it. That's right. That's right. You never know when I'll need it. Okay. Would anyone like to try to unpack that a little bit? What does that mean to you? To be the best, it's really kind of two pieces here. Number 1, the best versions of ourselves, and communicating what it is that we stand for.
You have to know what we're talking about, so to be able to represent yourself to everybody.
Are you talking about technical knowledge now?
Not technical. Well, technical and life skill as well. So basically, being able to represent yourself to everybody. You have to have background as far as how you represent yourself, not only personally, even in the office or socially.
Being authentic and being, I love what you said, by the way, being authentic and being consistent, you know, sort of like not just one person here and one person somewhere else.
I mean,
Understood.
You know, just being yourself, you should be able to represent yourself the way that you really are, for what we do in the office, it's violating. So it's something that, for me, as far as working with that, as far as violating, it's something that I'm very enthusiastic. I'm caring. You know, we try to help them as much as we can. You should be authentic either way outside the office or in the office.
And that could be, by the way, on both a macro and a micro level. So in other words, you could be thinking about what does the company do? Right? What service do we provide? Who do we help? Right? I'm going to get a little bit off for just a moment because I think you said something very powerful. They say if you ever have one of those days where you're kind of struggling with the work that you do and the impact that you're making, try to get into the heads of the end user of your product. Who is the end user of your product on average? Do we have an avatar? Is there someone kind of in your mind that you think about this person? Is it somebody who's managing a construction, any building manager, okay? And they're providing a safe working environment for everybody there as well as for pedestrians and others, right? Okay? So when we think about who those people are, give them a name, right? Try to imagine a face. And how is their life? We see, unfortunately, in the news all the time, construction-related accidents, other types of accidents, and all those things are only possible because, you know, maybe there wasn't enough care exercise. If we're contributing to that, that makes us feel good. Are we going to, do you want to continue or do you want to pause for 30 seconds? Okay, we can sort of talk around the room, so let me tell you what I was going to say before. So John Deere, are you familiar with the company? Okay, so they manufacture all sorts of machinery and products and things like that. Sometimes they will bring their executives or others out to the fields to see their products in action, to get a feeling for the impact that the product is making. And the benefit of that, again, is like I'm working and I really want to get things done, but does my work really make a difference? I know we talked about impact a little bit before. We'll come back to it, right? I want to know that I'm making an impact in my work every single day. They tell of a parable, I don't know if it ever really happened, about a guy in prison who for years was just incarcerated. And it was back in the days when they really didn't have, much to look at. In fact, he had stone walls or brick walls all around him. But there was one wheel affixed to the wall. Like a wheel right here, affixed to the wall. And every day he'd come, like sometimes you go to like a play set and they have these wheels and the kids play and they imagine, right? So he would go every day and he imagined that on the back end of that wheel was a mill, some kind of grindstone, something where his cranking of the wheel every day was doing something. 30 years later, they finally take him out of jail. He walks out to the other side. He looks at the wall. Nothing. Faints on the spot. Why? Because all of that work that I thought I was doing that was having an impact, turned out there was nothing there. So we want to know that we're making an impact. And going to see the end user is an important piece of that. But I was also, in addition to what you were saying, yes, on a company level, we want to know that we're making a difference. But on a personal level, we also have values. We also have things that we stand for. And when people interact with us, they hopefully know what really matters to me. Right? And we'll talk about what that looks like a little bit more as we continue. Would anyone like to try? I know you all have food now. Please eat. But would anyone be willing to read number 2 despite the food in front of you? And sort of withhold your gratification for another 30 seconds. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, influence allows us to direct and augment the work of others.
Okay. What does that mean to you? Direct and augment. Yes? Okay. Anyone else? Thank you. Appreciate it. What's that? It could be. I mean, these sounds like these are examples. Okay? To direct means to give guidance and direction to people. And augment is to amplify, right? To strengthen, to add power to somebody else's work. So when I influence somebody, in many cases, we all have role models, right? We all have people that inspire us. And I mean, I even see this, for example, I know this sounds kind of silly, but I work out in my basement. And so it's just me and my screen and whichever workout video I happen to pop onto the Wii, whatever it is. And they're having conversations, these exercise people, they're having conversations with me, right? Now they never met me, I never met them, that probably will never happen, right? But they're telling me, come on, go, right, push, and all these kinds of things, all this motivating talk. You can do it, and the thousands of people watching this together, we're all in this, all this talk. And it sounds like a bunch of psychobabble. But the reality is, at least I find for myself, sometimes when I'm kind of hitting a wall, it pushes me through. Because I feel like there's somebody who's encouraging and somebody who's providing that extra oomph, we might call it. So that's part of influence as well. It's inspiring other people. It's being a role model for them. Some of that overlaps certainly with integrity. And that influence allows people to do the work they need to do and do it right, do it on time, etc. And finally, number 3. I want to remind you that I'm a former teacher, and so I know how to call on people who haven't raised their hands. But I'm trying to behave myself. Yes, ma'am, go ahead. Okay, so it's all nice and good to be a person of integrity and even influence, but without the impact, there's no reason to be here, right? Ultimately, that's what pays the bills. That's what drives the company's success. But these are pieces that are often the underlying components that drive impact, right? We have to remember that we are all human beings, that our team members are human beings as well. Oftentimes, people rise in the ranks because of what we might call technical skills. I go to school, I get an MBA, I become I have an advanced sense of how business works. I learn a specific proficiency, and so I have the technical know-how. But what oftentimes our colleges and even our elementary and high schools fail to prepare us for, and really fail to accentuate. And I'm even saying for educators who are dealing with kids on a daily basis. I did a talk in Orlando a year and a half ago, not even, less than that, to 350 approximately assistant principals, all throughout Orange County, which is Orlando, and its environs. And what was the topic? Communication and listening skills and what we call soft skills. And some people don't like the term soft skills, so we can call them human skills, right? For those of us who feel that soft skills doesn't sound macho enough, or whatever it is, right? But it's the skills that drive the technical skills, right? You might know everything, but if you're a bull in a china shop, or you don't know how to relate to people, or you don't have the wherewithal of how to give over information in a way that it's going to be properly received, and morale is tanking in your department because you're just not doing it right, then all the technical wisdom in the world is not going to drive success. So it's a kind of like a combination, if you will, of the two. But impact is ultimately the goal. Right? That's where we are with things. So these are some things to keep in mind. Now, let's come back to integrity. Okay? I want to unpack that just a little bit with you before we get into an important conversation. So when I think about integrity, I think about following through with a promise or a commitment. If I say to you that I'm going to follow up with you, I do it. Okay, had a guy this evening. I was supposed to be on a leadership podcast, and I actually forgot about it because things have been so busy. But the last email exchange, he said, "I'll send you a Uber conference link, and we'll do it the time that we agreed to," which was last Monday, by the way. And on Thursday, oh goodness, today on Wednesday, he's like, "Oh, I forgot. I'm so sorry. Can we try again?" This type of thing. Meanwhile, I'm going to be on a different podcast tomorrow, and I've gotten like 27 reminders already, so everything's good on that front, okay? But the idea is we have to make commitments, and then we have to follow through. And sometimes it's as simple as putting it on your calendar. Sometimes it's just asking somebody else to remind you, whatever it looks like, but you're showing somebody that it matters to you, and you're prepared to step forward in that regard. And this doesn't need to be said for this audience. As I look around the room, we're neat. We're well organized. We come together, we present well, right? There's an element of self-care and self-integrity, right? The way we present ourselves matters. It doesn't mean that we have to be fully, in the world of Instagram, it doesn't mean that we have to play this fake game of who we really are, but we do want to present our best, put our best foot forward all the time. It doesn't mean we always have to be exactly perfect, but we come in a manner that gives credence and value and respect to the work we do, to myself as a leader, and to everybody that I serve. Because we want people, if we look up to somebody, we want them to be admirable. Right? Nobody wants a leader that doesn't respect themselves and doesn't bring their A game every day. Another piece is honesty. And this is probably the hardest one for all of us. Having an honest, candid conversation with somebody. I actually just posted today something called the EARN approach to giving feedback. It's not really our topic, but you might appreciate it, so I'll mention it quickly. EARN stands for event, action. I'm trying to remember what all four of them are, but it'll come to me in a second. But the idea is that when you see something, something that occurred, like for example, you're at a meeting and somebody takes a call in the middle of the meeting and walks outside and takes the call and then comes back in 5 minutes later. Let's say that happens. And that's a big no-no. I mean, I don't want to say it is in this group, I don't know. But let's say in your environment, it's a big no-no. Okay? So instead of going up to the person and yelling at them or saying something that was really not good, being critical of what you saw, you would say to them, I noticed last week during our meeting or yesterday at the meeting that you had your phone on the desk and you took a call during our meeting. Okay? The impact of that was that you missed some important conversation and you weren't really present for what we were discussing. Next time, would you consider powering your phone off and leaving it at your desk before we start our meeting? Something like this. So it removes the critique. It keeps it all about the action and the result. So it's event, action, result, and next steps. That's EARN. Okay? Event, action, result, next steps. Right? What did I see? What was the context? What did I see? What happened as a result of what I saw? And how can we do it better the next time? A little bit of a digression, but it, I just happened to write the article posted today, so it's top of mind. Okay, but when we do this, and the last one I wanted to mention is that we are interested, and we'll come back to this a little bit later as well, in the well-being and of others around us. Those are areas in which integrity really shines forth. So now I'm going to invite you to take a look at the paper I gave you before, and see if you can make sense of what you see in the chart at the bottom of the first page. Who you are and how you want your team to operate that you would like to share with us. Accountability. Okay. What was that? Honesty. Anyone else have one that may just be... I'm sorry?
I thought they've been nodding at honesty.
There were a bunch of people with honesty? Yeah? Okay.
He didn't make it to
He only saw the money.
He only got to A.
Yeah.
I went to M. Money.
He jumped right there, huh? Yeah, oh, money's there. That's true. Yeah, of
He
course.
saw it right away. No
Yeah,
worry.
yeah. Cha-ching. Well, it's right there in the middle, so fair enough. Anyone else? Honesty, teamwork, communication. Yes, sir? You were going to say something? Yeah, I just in case you weren't, I didn't say this before, so I apologize. So it won't cost you this time, but I do moonlight as a fine art auctioneer. Okay, so if you do raise your hand at the wrong time, it will cost you a few grand. Just be mindful of that. Okay, I'm sorry, what were you saying? Go ahead, try that again. Punctuality. Okay.
I was the first one here. Punctual.
I grew up in a certain neighborhood in Upper Manhattan that it was heavily populated by Jews of German descent. And so punctuality became, even though we are not of German descent ourselves, but it's one of those nature versus nurture things. And this was nurture 100% of the way. Maybe that's what drew my father to the community in the first place. Okay, good. Anyone else? Tolerance. Okay. All of these are powerful and deserve to be unpacked. Let me tell you a little trick you can use in the event. Let's say you did this with your team. Could anyone see that doing this with your team? Like having a conversation about what your values are, or maybe as a leadership team even? Could you imagine, just theoretically speaking, could you imagine doing this? Yeah? What are the 5 values that drive, our operations on a daily basis, who we are as a company, etc., how we present to others, these kinds of things. So everybody here is going to come up with their own values, right? So how do we start to take this bigger list and bring it to something more manageable? You hear the question? Right? I've got here a list of, I didn't count them, but it looks like about, 80, something like 80 values, more or less. Can't be 80 because it's divided by 3, but, 81, okay, values over here. So that's quite a few. Whatever there are a bunch. So how do I reduce that to core values that all of us can live with? That's the question. So turn the page for a moment. It's a nice little trick. It's something you can use, and you don't have to only use it for values. You can use it wherever you've got different things that you are kind of considering. The way that it works is, can everybody just, for the purpose of the exercise, take your pen, and let's write 5 of those values that we heard before. So let's briefly review them because I don't remember. Was accountability one of them? Can you please write accountability under A twice? Write it on the vertical column as well as the row on the top. Do you see what I'm talking about? I'll put my fingers where I want you to write it. Under the A twice. Accountability. So write it 2 times. Under each time that the letter A appears. Do you see that? Under the A. Like in that box. Okay? Punctuality was another one, correct? Okay. So for B, please write punctuality. Twice. I don't think we said respect, although I'm sure you would. What was another? You said it was more of a soft tolerance. Okay. For C, so we've got accountability, punctuality, tolerance for C, please. What's another one we said? Competence or confidence? Competence or confidence? Well, which one? You said competence. Okay, D, competence. Extra credit if you spell that correctly. I'm not looking, so don't worry. Okay? And finally, writing it in here. Sorry, I should. Not, yeah. In the black is not very useful. It'll be. Michael and I will be talking later. It's the night is still young. Okay. And then for E, what was yours? What? Teamwork. For E, please write teamwork. Okay. Now, for this exercise, it probably would have been better if we would have been doing this in the middle of March, during March Madness, but we'll sort of extrapolate from there. Okay, now the reason that the top box here is shaded black, besides to give Michael a place to write, is,
we can see my spelling.
So because A can't trump A. It's the same value, right? Right? What is the word again? It's accountability, right? So accountability is not more important than accountability. It's the same thing. But now if you move over one, it's accountability up against, what's B? Punctuality. Now, of the two, I'm asking you to pick, now you could do it by letter, so A or B. Put the letter that you feel is more important, and with a number. The number is as follows. If it's much more important, put a 3. If it's somewhat more important, put a 2. If it's slightly more important, put a 1. And don't say they're even, because that's cheating. I make the rules, okay? So pick the one that you feel is more important as a value for you and your team, and then rank it based on how much more valuable it is. Are you with me? So it should say A3, B2, A1, something like this. And I'm going to ask you to do the same for the entire chart. Okay? So you compare C to A, and you compare C to B. And then you move over and you do... We tolerate mistakes. We tolerate people who are different than us. We tolerate Met fans. I'm sorry, this is Brooklyn. I shouldn't have said that. I grew up in the Bronx, whatever. Dad's from the Bronx, so I apologize. Do not write here.
Put a line to enter.
Yeah, I know. This is like a lot. See, I thought when I first was presenting this, I thought I was going to have a screen and a wall, and I would just show you visually. But then we converted it into hard copies. So it's all good. All good. It was a last minute change there. Okay. Now, I'm going to cut the exercise short for the purpose of getting to a couple of other pieces and still staying within my time frame. But I wanted to give you a sense, at least, of number one, what is integrity, the importance of values, knowing what they are. Now, one thing that values can be useful in a variety of different ways. And actually, in the book that I wrote on the topic of leadership, one of the chapters I devoted specifically to know what your values are and let them help you guide decisions. Because oftentimes we have what we call, there's medical ethics, so there's business ethics, right? There's human ethics, human relations ethics. What do I do in a situation where there are two competing interests and both of them have a good justification or whatever it is, but at the end of the day only one can move forward, whatever that looks like. Okay? So if I have values and I communicate them and we repeat them again and again and they're part of who we are and how we operate, then it makes those decision-making situations a lot easier. To use an educational analogy, there's something called PBIS, which stands for Positive Behaviors, Instruments, and Supports. So we instituted that in the school that I was principal of, and it's basically a values-based behavioral system. So you embrace certain values, let's say respect, safety, ours were safe, friendly, respectful, and responsible. Those were our 4. Okay? Now what does safety look like on the school bus? And what does safety look like in the bathroom? And what does safety look like in the classroom or on the playground? And what does respect look like in each of these venues? Right? And when I see somebody who is doing something that demonstrates respect, I can now positively reinforce that because it's a value we've communicated. So the more that your values are top of mind for you and front and center for everyone to see, the easier decision making will be. That's the idea. That's the essence. But this concept, when properly utilized, can help you make a lot of difficult decisions because you tease out all the variables and you start to say, well, what's more important here? Is urgency versus, let's say I'm doing a rush job, doing it right. What's the priority or how do we make that determination? Okay, so briefly before we move on, because the biggest one to unpack is the one we just did, which is integrity. So what's your takeaway from that? To be a leader of integrity is, I don't want you to be like the students in my classroom over the years where, like at the end of the day, they come home to their significant other. So what did you learn tonight? Come on, do it. You're a fourth grader. Johnny, what did you learn at school today? Come on, what's the answer? Nothing. Thank you. Right? I don't want you to be that guy. So let's pretend we actually learned something. So what did you learn about integrity? What? Know your self-worth. What else?
Know who you are and project it to others.
Project it to others. So taking what you said and adding a dimension to it. Great. What else? Being authentic. Knowing your values. Being a leader who demonstrates or engenders trust. Right? These are all parts of being a leader of integrity. Let's talk briefly about influence, because I know I have to start to wrap things up. Okay? We've touched on a lot of it already, because as we discussed, to be influential is to create relationships with people. It's to demonstrate care. And we talked about the quote of John Maxwell of, I don't care how much you know until I know how much you care. It's finding out what's really going on with somebody. There's a great talk by Simon Sinek. Do you know the name? Know Your Why? TED Talk, a lot of different talks, very famous leadership and business expert. And so he talks about a guy who's in sales. And for the last quarter, his numbers have been dropping. Right? So the callous technician, if you will, the surgeon who's looking at it as the sales manager says the guy is slacking, his numbers are dropping, time to cut bait, or time to let him go. The empathetic leader, the empathic leader, the leader that we need to be, I see your numbers are dropping. What's going on? How can I help? Right? When you start to understand the challenges that people are going through, and sometimes they won't tell you, but if you give them an opening, they'll open up to you. If you demonstrate that you care, and oftentimes it's about how you listen, an open stance with your body, leaning in, putting your phone away, eyes on the individual. I don't know if you're aware of this, but in excess of 50%, I'd like to say 63% of the information we read in communication with others is through nonverbals. It's through eyes, it's through gesture and facial expression, posture, all these things. We read all of that. The words almost don't matter. It's like 7%. The words almost don't matter, right? Because I can tell if you're really being honest with me, right? You can say words, but I'm reading for more. I'm trying to see, is there authenticity in this conversation? So influence is about care and concern, right? It's also about getting to know them as individuals and really starting to, and modeling for them, right? We talked about his integrity. If I see somebody doing the right thing or acting in a particular way, that influences me to want to be like them, especially if they care for me. There's an element of reciprocity there. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the soft skills, the development, the relationships, and all of that. Let's talk a little bit about impact. I'm going to give you something that we cannot get into now, and I hope you actually do go back and look at this. It's a subset of an ebook that I wrote for understaffed leaders, but it's really not related specifically to them. And it has to do with setting SMART goals. Are you familiar with SMART goals? Would you mind passing this around? Does anyone know what SMART stands for? It's an acronym. It's not that the goals are intelligent, but they stand for SMART. SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic or relevant, and time-bound. Time-bound. Okay? Now, the one that's most important, I think, at least from my perspective, and you can see, by the way, how this unpacks over the pages I followed. Flip for a minute to page 2, please. It describes the SMART acronym. it's great to show up every day to have, to work and do whatever we do, but sometimes we just do work because we think we need to do work and be busy. It's our job as leaders to be strategic. And it's important for us to really think about what's going to drive us, what's going to drive our division or whatever it is that you do specifically to the best possible outcome. And when you know what that is, now you want to set some goals that are going to make sure that those happen. Okay? So specific means, what exactly am I doing? Measurable means, can I quantify it? I want to become a leader of influence. Can that be quantified? How could it be quantified?
For starters, in today's day and age, social media, it's very easily quantified.
If you're talking about like leading, if you're talking about like an online, being an influencer or whatnot, having followers, I'm talking about in the office place, in the workplace.
When your coworkers do you the same amount, like as far as like quality towards the work, because they see their leader doing going beyond the measure of what.
So we'd like to think that that's the case. We just can't measure that for sure, right? Because it's something it's hard to know what's driving a person's mind and their actions. So the point is, the more quantifiable and measurable, the better. Whatever we do, how will I know that it's happening? How can I measure it? So for example, if I need to be making sales calls, if I need to write a proposal, if I need to be nurturing client relationships, what is the specific action I need to be doing? And how will I measure that I did it? So if I'm nurturing client relationships, I might say in the next week I'm going to make 20 phone calls. And I'm going to schedule 5 face-to-face meetings over lunch and nurturing and building relationships. So it's measurable. Did I make those calls or did I not? Did I sit down with those people or did I not? Right? Did I take the first 30 minutes when my mind is freshest to work on the hardest thing, let's say, and cognitively, by the way, there is research about when to do what work, right? Certain work should be done when you are freshest. And for different people, that's different times. For me, it's first thing in the morning. 7:30, 8 o'clock, I sit down, I go to prayers, whatever I do, breakfast, I sit down in my office. That's when I write my articles. That's when I think creatively. That's when I do that stuff. I do paperwork and follow-ups and kind of posting on LinkedIn or who knows what, when I know that I have a lull, right? Our brains kind of have an ebb and a flow to it. And sometimes you can help it with exercise and good food and whatever else that you're doing, right? So the point is you have to be mindful of where and when and how. But if I need to write something important, I might say for the first 30 minutes every day, I'm going to shut off all technology and I will work at my computer or maybe even pen and paper. And I will craft whatever it is that needs to get done. And then you kind of, now is it time bound? It's the first 30 minutes every day for 5 days. Is it doable? Is it achievable? Hopefully. But don't bring on something that you can't achieve. Is it relevant? If I don't do it, what's going to happen? Right? So it is relevant, right? There's something behind it that's driving it. And you also want to think about how are you going to feel if the goal is achieved? Right? What will I feel like? Will it be euphoric? Will it feel relief? Will it feel like I'm doing more for my team? The more you can attach an emotion to it, the better. And finally, one last point on the topic of impact, because I'm already a few minutes over, and I did already tell you that I grew up in Washington Heights, or I didn't mention it by name, but I need to be very careful about time here. Okay? And the last part is try to create a coaching mindset for yourself and for people in your team. Right? People do well when there are others who are willing to mentor. And mentoring and coaching, by the way, are not the same thing. But talking to people, asking them what are their challenges, where are they struggling, and then you give them some space to talk about it. And what else? And you kind of open it up for what are the issues. And what of those would give you the biggest breakthrough today? Right? What would be the most... If we could solve one problem of the 3 or 4 that you just presented, which one will drive you and give us the best result? And then you kind of work with that to kind of unpack it more. So to recap what we talked about, that leadership has a ton of, right? There's books being written every day. I just took a look. It was a little bit humbling. I think my book at this point is like 980,000th something on Amazon. It did better when I launched 2 years ago. But new books are coming all the time. And it's very hard, unless you're really putting it out there constantly, to keep tabs of what's presented. I just gave you a snippet of what being a good leader includes. So if you think about integrity, if you think about being influential, and then you ask yourself, how am I making an impact? Whether it's setting goals and keeping my people accountable, whether it's helping coach them towards their outcomes, and just being that supportive person driving results, then hopefully you will have the impact that you want and then some for yourselves, for your teams, and for the company at large. Thank you all for listening. I appreciate it. And I hope that this was meaningful. 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 Meaningful.